Hello, fellow watch lovers, nerds, enthusiasts, or however you identify. This is the 40 and 20 podcast with your hosts, Andrew and my good friend Everett. Here, we talk about watches, food, drinks, life, and other things we like. Everett, how are you?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I had kind of a fun morning, a fun family morning where we were engaging in a, I guess you'd call it like a self-help family. It's this strength-based, like, how do I become a better husband, better parent, which the first thing I said as we started and we got there, they said,
Have a better wife and kids.
How did you guys get interested? How did you guys get interested in this? And Kim kind of talked about why she was interested. We're doing it with another couple, and they're friends of ours, but they're sort of beta testing their ability to be coaches. Mm-hmm. And Kim talked about, wow, I just, we like you guys, and I, listened to the pitch, and I thought it was interesting. And then it came to me, and I said, well, I got to be honest with you guys. The idea of this repulses me. And everybody kind of like looked at me for a second, and then uncomfortable laughter. And and then I said, well, but with that said, I know it's one of those things that once you get into, it's going to be fine. So yeah, that was my morning. It is genuinely one of those things that once you get started, it's easier to engage. It's much harder for me to engage in that type of thing conceptually. Mm-hmm. But once I get going, I don't have any trouble talking about my feelings or whatever. That's not a difficulty for me, which I think it is for some people. Not for me, but that just the idea of getting step. Started. Yeah. I told Kim as we were driving over there, I think I'd been a little agitated, and I was like, this thing just raises my quills. The idea of doing something like this triggers some fight or flight, and it makes me anxious and irritated.
I can dig that.
Yeah, how are you?
Good. I went to kids' indoor soccer practice this morning, which was like watching a bunch of 4-year-olds with about 60 soccer balls run amok.
Did you get arrested again?
For being there?
Yeah.
No, I wore a fake mustache and eyeglasses.
Was Mark there at least this time?
Yeah. Well, that was my cover. Okay. That was how I made it work. So anyway, yeah, I went to that this morning, and it was quite the experience. It's definitely something I have never thought I would observe or witness. And now that I have, I don't know that I want to again, even as much fun as he has. So I'm gonna have to take him on, subsequent Saturdays and watch chaos. Yeah, I wish we could padlock that door to the field from the outside.
Sure.
And then just bounce for like an hour and a half. Because that was the other thing. It was crazy how long it was. It was a full 50-minute practice. The coach in there has patience to the ends of the earth.
It's crazy.
She
a
had
youth soccer coach,
like 8 4-year-olds out there, and she was just chilling, hands in her pockets, wandering around, giving them instructions. If they listen, they listen. If not, like, fuck it, whatever. You'll be back. They're locked in here with me.
Like the hardest, most thankless jobs in the world: Red Cross nurse, youth soccer coach.
Yeah, it was awful. And Sam's like, "Would you want to play indoor soccer?" And I was like, "I don't think so." Because the problem is, I am.
Sorry.
I'm at an awkward level of competitive in that I have the skill set to be good at a lot of things, but not the inclination. Like I have those kind of residual, like, learned at a youth skill sets that exceed a lot of other folks my age in practices like that or in sports like that, but just not the desire. Like I'm the one who's going to go there and like, okay, I'll go play indoor soccer, but I mostly want to drink beer. And if that's the case, then I will be on your indoor soccer team.
I mean, that's how I approach everything in life.
At this point, yeah.
I'm interested in that as long as I can drink too much alcohol.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be too much. As long as I can just have beer while I'm doing it. And if you're going to take it too seriously, I don't want to be involved.
Yeah,
because this is a game.
I'll take this job with that compensation package if I'm allowed to drink too much alcohol at work.
And work when I feel like
it. Well, I want to know more about how you're doing.
But it's not important right now.
But it's not important right now because in the wings, we've got someone on the line. And I feel like we always do this, right? We lead up to this. We lead up to this as if the
We
audience
tease it as if they haven't read the title of the episode.
So you already know.
Yeah.
You already know that on the line today, we've got Dan Clayton, a man of many names, of many non de plumes. Most recently on Instagram, Timely Moments. But Dan is famous, I would say, in the watch world.
I'll accept famous. You should accept famous too, Dan.
Perhaps notorious. Dan is, I would say, in terms of engaged watch fam, one of the single most knowledgeable experts on military watches. And he's taken that knowledge. He's been on Bellingham podcast. He's been on Two Broke Watch Snobs. I'm sure I'm missing other podcasts, but someone who's just universally known for knowing his shit when it comes to military watches. Dan, how are you?
I'm good. How are you guys? Thanks for having me on, and Happy New Year as well.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you as well.
And thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on.
No, thank you for having me. That was quite an introduction, though, guys. I'm going to have to, try and live up to that now, aren't I? No pressure. So.
Being a military man, you're used to sort of the way we do. When you get an award, or you get promoted or something, they go back through this. Well, Dan did this, and they did this, and he served in this place and did this job.
You mostly just want it to end.
You mostly want it to end. So
you stop listening to the spiel, don't you? And then you forget what you need to do, which is or the spiel is so in depth, you sit there and kind of go, "Oh, did I actually do that? I can't remember."
That can't be real. That wasn't me.
Yeah, that wasn't me, guys. But I'll take it. You know what I mean?
That is a really nice way to say that thing.
Exactly.
Even though that's not how I remember it. Dan, can you just take maybe 30 seconds and introduce yourself, who you are, what you do, how you got here today with us?
Okay, so obviously my name's Dan. How I got into the whole watch collecting side of it was after I joined the military. Because I needed to wear a watch. And then obviously, as you've alluded to, I got quite deep into the hobby and then started reaching out across the watch fam, as it were, to get further information. And obviously through reaching out, built up different connections around the watch fam. And obviously that led us to where we are today, because obviously we've got mutual friends through AJ over at the Bellingham podcast. So that's us in a nutshell, isn't it, really?
I think that's right. I think partially cringed on the word watch fam, and I do the same thing. Although it's a word we use pretty.
You use.
Yeah, that's right. You don't use that word, do you? I think it's a word that has value, even to the extent I find it a bit cringy, right? Because there's this idea that there's a community here. And it's this bizarre community, like many internet communities are, right? Where I kind of knew what you look like. You've got an Instagram, and occasionally you're on that Instagram, and so I had an idea. But here's this person that I feel like I know better than certainly I do know him, because we don't know each other all that well. But no. It's this very familiar, like there's zero discomfort. I know what you're going to sound like. I know the things you're going to talk about. So I think that watch fam, as silly a word as it is, it's a hashtag ready, phrase, right?
Of course.
As silly as that may sound, I think that it is powerful in that it gives us something to describe who we are, how I know Dan, because in reality I don't know Dan, but it gives us a way to describe our relationship.
You are going to have to not look at me when you're talking.
Because my audio goes to
bouncing back and forth.
Okay.
He just wanted to look in your eyes.
I don't blame him, because I have these really, really just deep, endless eyes.
Beautiful.
Mesmerizing.
Exactly. They just pull people in. They're like a tractor beam.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that your audio is not coming in and out.
Cool. No, I know what you mean by cringing at the whole watch fam thing, but another point which is quite interesting, obviously, you guys obviously reserve armed forces, and obviously I'm currently serving in the regulars, obviously, and I find as well that when you meet people within this watch community, as it were, you bond over the whole watch thing, and then obviously if you have one other thing that you've got in common, it's a lot easier to break down those those barriers, as it were, isn't it? And kind of, get along and communicate and all that kind of stuff. So I think the military thing also has a benefit to it as well. And
Mm-hmm.
quite obviously my experience of the watch fan, especially, day to day slash in real life, as it were, and, not on over, the internet, as it were, or Instagram.
I prefer
a
the
lot
phrase
of my
IRL.
IRL.
Yeah.
There you go. See, I wouldn't have used that because I'm not hip and down with the kids, so I would never have known. But I've got some good friends in the military who are also into the whole watch thing, and you bond over both of them, and I think that's quite a good thing. So that's from my experience, anyway.
Two things in common is more better than one thing in common.
Yeah,
and when you're in the military, you basically have to live together. So if you can find any other component of your life, any other variable that you share in common, it's way more better.
Yeah.
Because military can be super isolating.
Yeah, it definitely can.
Andrew and I are friends from before watches, BW, as we refer to that period of time. We've never referred to it that way.
We're just creating hashtags. That's the episode, is creating hashtags with Dan C.
So our connections are our connection is one of friends first, and then I kind of browbeat Andrew into becoming a watch person, and that's fine, right? But the idea that we've made relationships, certainly with AJ, with other people in the community, people that I've never even spoken to, right? Or we talk to EMG quite a bit, and Eric is someone that we've had on the show, and these are guys that have this successful business. Who have, according to Eric, and maybe this has changed, but the last time we discussed this topic with him, had never even talked to each other on the phone. Derek, Eric, and Ed have perhaps still today never talked to each other on the phone. So there's this, the internet does a thing here, and our ability to mutually engage in a topic is super interesting. But that's kind of an aside. I don't think we planned on talking about that, but
It's whatever. It's our show.
It's our show. It's our show. So speaking of It's Our Show, normally when we have guests on, we say, hey, guest, we've got some questions for you, and we're going to dictate those questions and move through this thing at our pace. However, Dan, you're
mixing it up, are you?
Yeah, you're getting the special treatment.
Fantastic.
You have sent us an agenda. I would call it an agenda, and I'm inclined to let you lead this conversation a little bit. Generally speaking, we don't really have any goals today. I think you might have some goals, and to that end, do you want to take the lead here?
Yeah, I mean, what do you want to start with? You've seen the agenda, as it were. The notes that I put together when we obviously were planning out this episode. So, what part do you want to start with?
I think that we can move into some specific stuff later. I think it would be a pretty neat starting point to get your unique perspective, because you've got some very peculiar and particular insight, but that's been raised and nurtured by your connection to watches. So you've got some specific watch background, and I think it would be super interesting for folks to learn more about that, who you are, and how you got into watches specifically, and what your experience there is.
Okay, so I've alluded, So I obviously joined the military, and that's obviously our other factor between us three, that links us, in commonality. So when I joined up, I got into the whole watch thing because obviously I Googled what watch to take with me through training, and obviously when I Googled that, I came back with loads of different returns, hundreds of thousands of returns, and then the majority of them came out to be articles about vintage military watches.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't take a vintage military watch to obviously basic training and trade training and all that kind of stuff, but it was something that I kept my eye on, because also the other thing that I'm interested in is the whole military history side of it. And I think when you join up, you do get indoctrinized, you get a bit institutionalized as well into some of the history of obviously the organization that you join. So for me, I liked the idea of collecting these watches because it kind of brought the history of, some of the battles and the battle honors that you hear about and you learn about going through training, almost to life. It gives you a little totem to kind of say, actually, that potentially could have been at that location because it was made in a specific time. And, we've got accounts to say that this was, the kind of stuff that these, soldiers, sailors, airmen used. So I guess that's what got me into it, was the idea of combining this history with something tangible, which, is quite cool to collect. But then also the fact that I could use it as well, with differing degrees of accuracy, because let's face it, some of these watches are almost 80 years old. But I could still use them, I could enjoy them, and impart a little bit of my own story onto them as well. So that idea for me was kind of what got me into it. My initial collection started with, the general service watches to the British Army. And that's really what I started with. I wanted to collect those because, again, I like the idea that, my forebears, as it were, could have potentially been issued that watch, and they were probably in very similar situations that I have found myself in my own career today, and that to me is quite a cool little niche thing that I enjoy. And then after that, it just kind of expanded. I'd do some research on a different conflict and find out the kind of watches that were used in those conflicts, and then obviously I would then research those watches to death, as it were, and then
rabbit hole.
To try and exactly that. You go down the rabbit hole and you start finding things that you're like, oh, that's really cool. I never thought I'd find that. And then you go on eBay, you go on forums, you go on Facebook groups and all that kind of stuff to try and find either information, but also people who are willing to sell them or people who are already selling them, because it'd be quite cool to have within your own collection. And that's kind of where it kind of escalated for me, as it were.
What was the hardest watch that you have right now to hunt down?
Okay, so the hardest singular watch is my Roamer watch from the Rhodesian War.
Okay. Why was it so hard to hunt down?
So firstly, there's not many of them known to collectors, or within the collecting space. I think there's probably about 250 of them known to collectors that survived the war. That's known to collectors. That's not to say there's thousands of these things that are potentially in people's attics. But I found one on a auction site, which specializes in watches as well. So this was obviously a legitimate vintage watch auction site that only specializes in obviously watch auctions and high-end jewelry. And I found it. I actually initially missed the auction itself, so it ended, and I just decided to email the company and just say, look, I noticed in your because they published the results of the auctions of what lots sold and what ones didn't. The watch didn't sell. So for whatever reason, it didn't sell. Maybe it just wasn't the flavor of the month. And I just sent them an email and said, look, if the seller is willing to still go through with a transaction, I'm willing to buy it. And it was just through luck that the seller was willing to sell it. So, and we went through that company as the mediator, because obviously it was on their website. Unfortunately for me, I also got to pay the minimum reserve on it as well, because it was a lot that hadn't sold, so it could only legally be sold in England for its minimum reserve. So.
And so, Andrew and I obviously know exactly what a Roamer watch is, but for those listening who don't, can you tell us what that is? And also, I'll caveat that to say, Andrew and I have no clue what you're talking about.
Fantastic. So, a Roamer watch is just a mechanical. It's about 36 mil watch. It kind of looks like the Hamilton W10 watches. It's got that kind of weird oval case shape on it, and then it's just got Arabic markers. There's really nothing special about it whatsoever, other than the fact that it has obviously the Rhodesian engraving markers on the back of it to prove that it was a military issued watch. And unlike other watches that you would have seen that obviously have been stamped in from the manufacturer, these watches were actually initially bought sterile. So they had no issued case back markings whatsoever. The only time these watches got the issue markings were once they got to the Rhodesian army and they got an individual to actually get a Dremel tool and Dremel a Rhodesian issue number in the back of the case. So
fantastic. And so these are made by Roamer.
Yes, they are. Yeah.
And Roamer is an English company.
It's a Swiss company.
Okay.
It's a Swiss company. I don't know if they're still in production. I think they're predominantly vintage now, and I don't think they're really doing much. And if they are doing something, they're very, they'll be quite fairly low end. I mean that, or they were absorbed by Swatch Group and probably in the quartz crisis and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
But I can't tell you because I've never actually looked for the modern equivalents, as it were.
And you've just looked for that watch specifically. That was the one. What drew you to that watch specifically?
Okay, so I only looked for that one watch, and the only reason I drew from that search for it specifically was because when I went through training, I met a officer in the British Army who was ex-Rhodesian Special Forces. So back in the, like I said, back in the heyday, the end of the British Empire, as it were, Rhodesia was a British colony. Mm-hmm. And obviously what happened, won't go into too much detail. If obviously the audience want to go and research that, they can. And there's obviously loads of accounts of the Rhodesian War, or the Bush Wars, as they became known as. So when he finished his time serving with the Rhodesian Army, he transferred his commission into the British Army, and he was a captain in the British Army when I met him. So, and he just, like I said, a part of his role was to, basically talk to us about his experience. So
fantastic.
That's what it was. Again, it was one of those, wasn't it, where you meet someone who's fairly interesting, you go and research what they went through, and then you find out that there's also a watch that you can find. So that's what it was.
And you want a piece of that history to be able to wear and enjoy. And I can dig that.
And what was quite cool was I bought that watch probably 2016 at the time. And then I was overseas, as you guys know, through obviously the other podcasts, and AJ referring to me as Dan in Cyprus. So I was obviously working over there. When I returned from Cyprus back to UK, I came back for a long course to obviously get a different qualification within the military. That captain, because he was a rank of the captain, he was serving at the camp that I was doing the training at, and I went to his office, had a cup of tea with him in a meeting, and I pulled the watch out and said, "Do you remember these?" And he did. So that was quite a cool kind of all-round circle of him telling me about the watch, me going off researching it, finding one, and then bringing one back and saying, "Look what I found."
And now is this in the Rhodesian Army as a captain? Is that the same rank that we would refer to as a captain? That's a third level of officer. Yeah. So
yes,
that's the level both Andrew and I are, and you're a captain as well, right?
I'm not. No.
What's your rank?
I'm a corporal.
Oh, so you're enlisted?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
So you actually work?
Yes, I actually work.
Yeah, we don't work.
Well, apparently work. I think a lot of the stuff that we do is pretending to work and getting away with it.
That's the goal.
That's the goal, isn't it?
So we're in the same boat.
Right, that is the service.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is it, isn't it? It's having the appearance that you're busy without being too busy.
A guy used to work for me. He would have his computer turned off, and he would just type on his keyboard, and his computer would be facing the wall. You'd think he was just plugging away, and he's really working on a turned off computer. It is genius. He can spend all day doing
this
that.
Was your first sergeant, right?
He is that. Promote that man, because he is going far.
Yeah, he is going places. Yeah,
fantastic. Well, so I would like to know a little bit more. You actually are involved with a couple of manufacturers and companies in by way of their development of their pieces, and I'm fascinated by this idea. I mean, how you got there, and I think that the answer will probably not surprise any of us, but I don't know the answer. So why don't you tell us the answer, and then tell us what that looks like for you.
So when you mean development of the watches, is this going back to the Bremont thing?
Well, yes. So yes. Bremont, and then also there's other companies that you've spent sort of development time with too, right?
Yeah, I guess so, loosely. Okay, so the Bremont thing, we'll start there. So that was the first kind of foray, as it were, into being a little bit more active than just buying watches and Googling them. Effectively, I was lucky in my last unit to be surrounded by other guys who are into watches, but also be exposed to the Bremont military special projects, as it were. So effectively, as we know, Bremont will commission a watch to commemorate your trade, your squadron, your unit. And the unit I was at the time, there was quite a big mix of people who would kind of, shuffle in and out for their various rotations, and obviously on their wrist, some of them had those watches. And, you talk to them about it when they're in the bar and all that kind of stuff, and you get to have a look at them and see what they are. And I just decided, I tell you what, that's a little bit of me, that, I'm already a watch nerd. I'm already looking at this kind of stuff. Let's, instead of just buying a watch that's got a story, let's buy a watch that's personal to me. And that's what I went down and did. So I emailed Bremont, started that two-way engagement. And then 7 months down the line, I had a watch delivered, which was obviously the first one of the project that I'm heading up, and I'm quite happy to say still a live project with them. And, that's pretty cool. So we did that, which was the first kind of foray into that kind of stuff where I had a bit more of an active involvement. And then out the back of that, I've obviously been on other podcasts and spoken about that. And through that, a couple of other companies reached out to me and started again another dialogue just about, military watches in general, but also kind of what I thought of certain complications. So, for example, we have spoken before we recorded about Sangin Instruments. Obviously, we know that they're out of California. Out of the back of the Two Broke Watch Subs podcast, Jake reached out to me, said he enjoyed the podcast. Obviously, we bonded on the fact that we're both military, or in his case, obviously, retired military. And obviously, he showed me what he was developing, and then he asked me a few questions on certain things that, would I agree would be a good complication or a good, thing to put into his watches. And I guess that in a way helped develop some of his models, because obviously he's, constantly asking for feedback or ideas generated from the kind of community that he wants his watches to go to. So I guess loosely in that regard, I helped, at least tailor some of the ideas of what may be handy on a watch. One of them being my thoughts on dual time watches, and how would it be best to represent that? Would it be, a dual time bezel? Would that be handy? Or would you go and have a full GMT movement, and, the pros and cons of that kind of stuff? And then the other company that I've done a little bit of photography for, as it were, and kind of pushed them on the social media side was Vertex Watches. And obviously I got sent one of their press pieces for a period of time, and just got told to enjoy it, effectively enjoy it, take photos, and then obviously push it on social media, and that's what I did. So I guess that's loosely some watch development through this hobby. So there you go.
But it's the kind of thing that for I think the average watch guy or gal, it's the kind of thing that is probably not afforded to us as an opportunity, right? Andrew and I have had some opportunities to engage with some manufacturers on what they're doing, with their product, and that's been really exciting. In fact, I think for me, that's been the most satisfying part of this thing, besides just sort of getting to know people. But that relationship that you're able to form, and that ability to have sort of a connection to a manufacturer and a connection to a certain watch piece. We interviewed these guys from Notice last week, Wes and Cullen, who are just both fantastic guys in their own rights, but also in terms of what they're doing with watches and what they're doing with their brand. I think that maybe no one else sort of making watches right now that's quite as engaged and involved as them in terms of the brands we're sort of stoked on. So really fun. But then to have them be really sort of effusive with their ideas about how perhaps we were part of that. I would be loath to expand on that idea, but they talked about, well, we were listening to your Skin Diver episode and that really got us thinking, and we want to thank you. We didn't do anything, obviously.
No,
Andrew
we
and
just
I
complained in a basement bedroom drinking beer.
right.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's funny, isn't it, how you get ideas can flow when the alcohol's flowing, and all of a sudden, other people will listen to it for whatever reason, and I guess that's how you may or may not have, in that situation, influenced their decision to, produce a watch in a certain way, and I think that's quite cool.
It's a pretty neat opportunity.
Yeah, it is.
It's a pretty neat opportunity, and for us, it's neat to hear about it. So you've talked about, I've heard you talk about, and you've talked to me directly about some of your key watch moments. Moments in your life that really sort of solidified your engagement in the hobby, or perhaps solidified the route your collection has taken. We've talked a little bit about your involvement with Bremont and Sangin and then Vertex, but there's also a Seiko SOG or SOG that I've heard you talk about a number of times. Can you just tell us a little bit about the Seiko SOG, what that meant to you, how you found it?
Yeah, that's fine. So I initially, I'd heard of these years ago, actually, to be honest, before I even got into watches properly. There's a couple of friends of mine who collect military stuff in general, and their focus is on the Vietnam War. I think they just find it really interesting. So obviously, I know them very well. When I'll be on a period of leave or seeing family, obviously, I'd go down and see them, and we just talk military stuff, as you would do over a beer, just, general kind of interests. And through that group of people, I found out, obviously, about what MacLeod SOG were. And obviously, for the listeners out there who don't know, they were the American Special Forces who conducted special operations during the Vietnam War. The majority of those operations being not in Vietnam for right or wrong reasons.
Right.
We won't get into that. But, effectively, they did cross-border, long-range patrols into the jungle, not in Vietnam. And the need for those guys in terms of their watches was that they had to have sterile watches. So, they went to, in this case, Seiko. And obviously the story is that they initially asked for Rolex watches. Because as we know, the special forces have a bigger budget than everyone else.
Give me that Rolex.
Give me that Rolex, because we know that you're going to buy us the best equipment. And obviously, that's what they asked for. The procurement manager, as it were, at the time, a guy called Ben Baker, he listened to them initially, effectively. However, he went out and visited the soldiers in Vietnam, conducting those operations, and said, right, actually, I can see you've asked for Rolex, but you're probably not going to get them, even though you've got the biggest budget, because they are X amount of dollars per unit. What else, what substitute, as it were, would be a happy medium? Because obviously we still want to give you stuff, but we can't give you hundreds of dollars worth of watch per man. And when he visited them, he noticed that the guys were already wearing Seiko watches. And he went, right, why do you wear those? And the answer was because it was robust, because it was shockproof, because it was it glowed in the dark, it was waterproof. All of those things fundamentally were the same reasons why they wanted Rolexes. They just wanted Rolexes because they were being necky, and they knew that they could get the best equipment.
And they were going to take them home when they were done.
And that is exactly it, However, he turned around and said, right, well, you're already wearing a Seiko, so I'm going to go knock on Seiko's door and see what we can do. And it's actually written down. I'll have to send you a link to this PDF, because it's interesting to read it alone. Those Seiko watches he bought, obviously under that contract, direct from Seiko for $8 each.
Jeez.
So
I don't know if
add on some inflation now, and you see how much these things are going for. It's insane,
And so you've actually procured a number of these, right?
Yes. So from the people that I have spoken to, I am apparently the only person in UK, maybe even Europe, who has all three.
All three. You could be the only person in the world who has all three.
I I would like to, take that, but I can't because you guys know of that Spencer Klein, yeah?
Yeah. Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah. He's had all three at one point or another because obviously he was the one who he was the one who did a video on them, all three together, outlining the histories, the years, and all that kind of stuff, which actually was a fantastic bit of reference material to try and find them as I was looking for them as well.
So this is a perfect segue to one of the questions that I really wanted to ask is I'd like to get some instruction from you as a person who has a medium to okay understanding of military watches and of vintage military watches. I want you to walk.
Can we say better than medium to okay?
I'm gonna accept medium to okay.
To okay because if I can't go too high, can we?
I mean, I have a medium to okay.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Oh, so for him, who's an expert,
to give us, I am a medium to okay knowledge.
Understood.
No, you have an excellent knowledge, so I would
I would say that I'm medium to okay as well.
And we're idiots.
I don't want that. No. You're an expert. I'm medium to okay. That's the world I'm okay living in right now. So I'm a person with a medium to okay knowledge of military watches to vintage watches. I'd like to get some education from you on getting into that world. What kinds of watches should I be looking for when I'm perusing eBay or any other kind of forums that sell watches? What do I need to keep my eyes peeled for? How do I get into this category of watch collecting, and how do I do it not like an asshole?
Okay, no, that's fine. I'll kind of wrap my brain and see what we come up with. So, firstly, I guess the big thing, and this is with all watches, isn't it, is don't go over your budget, because obviously there is a lot of guys out there who will buy a really expensive watch just because it's been written up to be the one. So I think firstly, obviously, do your research, but also put some parameters onto it. So for example, when I started with the whole military watch thing, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of different versions on there. You've got divers, you've got chronographs, you've got your triple, your three-handers, all of that kind of stuff. You've got, all these different watches for different uses. It's finding a watch that you would, I guess, have an affinity to, you know what I mean? So obviously I went for the ones that potentially could have been issued to someone in my position before, or finding one that's linked to either a hobby or an interest, you know what I mean, and kind of sticking within that. Because if not, you can, like you said, you can be here for days, even months just researching. And obviously, when you add in a complication, these watches get more expensive. So, my experience, I'd actually say that stick to your budget. So set a budget, and then also set what complication you want to buy. So, for example, if you want to buy a diver, and you will stop at nothing to buy a vintage military diver, then only look at military divers. Don't start looking at chronographs halfway through, because all of a sudden, you'll start finding all these other ththings. And like I said, that's how your costs build up on this hobby. So I would say,
as your universe expands, so does your budget.
I know that's obviously the same. That's obviously across watch collecting as a whole.
Sure.
But I think the problem is with military watches is because they are so prevalent in certain cases, it can obviously spiral out of control a lot faster. And then also, I'd also say that because the military watch trend has been increasing, hasn't it, in the last few years, maybe even 4 or 5 years. Sellers know now what they can get away with. So they could turn around and say, right, actually, this watch, just because it's got an issue date on the back, which relates to a famous war, they'll play on that issue date. So, for example, if you look at any Hamilton watch that's American issued, so those GW113s or whatever, I think it's 113s. If you look at them and they've got like a 1965 to 1970s issue date, the seller will go, yes, this went to Vietnam.
Obviously.
You don't know that.
Yeah.
They don't know that.
Right.
It's just been produced in the year that the Vietnam War was being conducted. It's the same for the British watches. So if you look at the British watches on the back, you'll tend to have 1980 is a big year for British issued watches, because it was the first year that the British Army got a quartz watch. Before that, they were all mechanical, hand-wound watches or automatics. So the quartz crisis came in, the British Army just, quartz became more accessible as a contract, because obviously there was a period of time where, quartz watches, effectively your F91Ws were more expensive than Speedmasters, which is outrageous. I want to go back to that time where I can buy a Speedmaster for less than a F91.
Yeah.
But that's what happened. The changeover was in the 80s with quartz to the British Army, and people play on it. So the watches that were produced with an issue date of 1982, for the British Army, we went to war in the Falklands. So sellers will say, this watch as worn in the Falklands. Well, no, it didn't happen like that.
Right.
So I think it's what you have to look at. You have to be careful, firstly, with that kind of stuff. So they're like my caveats. But in terms of watches themselves, I've noted down a few which I would say in different price points would be good ones, or good examples for obviously the audience to go out and look for. So World War II, if you're going to go and get a World War II issued watch, people always go for the Dirty Dozen, don't they?
Right, of course. She doesn't.
We know that they've got an investment value, and they're good watches. There's no denying it. They're good watches for the time, and they're nice watches even today, especially in good examples and good condition. But some of them can run into the thousands of pounds. You know what I mean? And that's insane for one watch.
That's a heavy watch.
Whereas if you went and bought the ATP watch, which was the predecessor versions of the Dirty Dozen, you're still getting all that heritage. You're getting a good watch and a vintage military watch at maybe a third of the price.
Really?
Sure.
You know what I mean? And so it's about being an informed consumer. You know what I mean? Like, do your research.
I think that's sort of the backbone of Andrew and I's not just watch collecting, but sort of our very beings is how can we get into this thing, whatever the thing may be, in a way that's thoughtful and effective, but also practical and efficient, efficient with our budgets. And I suspect that that concept, that budget efficiency concept, is perhaps more than any one thing, the thing that ties people who listen to our show versus Worn and Wound podcast, or even someone like Scottish Watches or 10 and 2, the folks that listen to our podcast and say, I really like that podcast. It's people will say, oh, well, I like the fact that you guys are relaxed, or that it's like sitting down and drinking a beer. I don't think that is the main glue. I think that the main glue for what we'd like to do and what we'd like to provide people is this idea that you can do this hobby. You can do this hobby without shucking out $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 per piece, and that develops for both of us. I think it's developed in a certain way, and I think for each individual collector, you hit that inflection point, and you either do or you don't. But we have some listeners that have been with us from the beginning that are very, very motivated to find the best $200 watches. And that transcends their collection in time, whereas some people start with the 150 or perhaps the SNK, right? The SNK. So many people start with the SNK, and then before you know it, they're buying Halios, and then next is Christopher Ward, and then they're like, gosh, I have really been dying to get an Explorer on my wrist, right? Which I believe perhaps you're wearing today, right?
Yeah. So today I've got my Rolex Explorer, and again, I like the aesthetics of the watch. I like the history of it. It ties in with my hobbies. So I'm obviously, you guys know from following me and engaging previously, I'm also a mountaineer and rock climber.
Right.
I like the connection to the whole mountains, the whole Everest piece with that watch, but it wasn't an easy purchase. That's a lot of money to put down onto a watch. You know what I mean?
Yes.
You sit there and kind of go, actually, guys, is this hype? Is it this Rolex hype that everyone likes, or am I buying this because I actually like the story behind it and I'll have a use for it? Fortunately for me, I was in a good position where I could afford to go in and do that. But I would, it's just one of those, isn't it? Like buy within your constraints and don't give into, I guess, the whole hype stuff which surrounds certain watches. And the problem is that sellers, especially vintage watch sellers, dealers or whatever, especially, you know, in my experience with the military watch side of it, like I said, they'll push to try and get it, and they'll be like, oh, but you want a piece of this history.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
I want the margin from your desire to have a piece of that history.
Yeah, and exactly that. And then they're like, you can have this history, but you can have this history if you're willing to pay X amount for it.
Now, Dan, I think that's a fantastic place for us to transition, because you know, we want to be respectful to our listeners, and also we're bloody damn curious ourselves. I've never said bloody in my life.
It's not an American phrase.
It's not. So that's all you.
It's more of a.
You've influenced
it's
me.
It's your inner Anglophile.
That's right. Before you know it, I'm gonna have I'm gonna have a full accent and
gross.
So
not that the accent's gross, but hearing it out of your mouth would be awful.
Fuck off.
It would be just miserable.
So, what? Maybe we can transition now into. So, if I'm a guy who collects, say $200, $300, $500, or $1,000 watches in that range, what pieces? If I want something with sort of no shit bona fides, military bona fides, within a budget that is more sort of efficient and dare I say grounded, because I don't know that's I don't mean to put a pejorative on the more expensive watches, right? But we've talked about Bremont and I say Bremont, but I think you say Bremont, which is
I say Bremont, but it is actually Bremont. You don't. It's a silent T.
So we're all fucked up.
Yeah, we're all wrong. We're all wrong.
But we've talked about Bremont, and we've talked about Sangin, and we've talked about Vertex, and you know, maybe some of these more expensive, certainly not expensive, but it's a bite of money. You know, if I want a 300 perhaps or a $500 legitimate military watch, where should I be looking, and how do I get there?
Yeah. Firstly, we've obviously looked at the whole vintage piece. So let's look at some actual modern ones where people can just go on the internet and effectively buy them and have them delivered tomorrow. So if you're looking sub $500, you know, a good watch would be the Marathon Navigator as a good example. You know, it is a company that obviously supplies to the Canadian and the American forces. You know, so there's some legitimacy there. It's a good, solid watch. You know, I mean, I'm just looking at some of the specs on it now. So it's roughly 42 millimeters. It's 20 mil lug width, so you can obviously change your straps out really easily. It's got a quartz movement. It's got end of life on it, and it's what's really cool. I think the coolest part of it is the fact that it's got your GTLS tritium tubes. You know, those gas tritium tubes.
Sure.
So it just glows. You know, and it's a really good watch. And last I checked online, they were £250. You know what I mean?
So I tried to buy one of those through the Army supply system, and it got denied.
Did it?
It did. And in fairness, I was trying to buy it for me just to see if that would work. It didn't work.
That's a shame.
Yeah,
that's a shame.
Because I think because I can order it offline, and that's not a problem. Yeah. But I would have rather had it come to me through the Army supply system.
You try. I mean, you're not talking about AFIS. You're talking about actually.
Yeah, no, through like the
actually getting it issued to you.
Yeah, I tried that. It didn't work. It didn't work.
Yeah, well,
those procurement assholes.
Exactly. I mean, I tried to get issued. So, the current issued watch, general service watch to the British Army is a Pulsar. Actually, and it's made famous by. I mean, we have to bring him up now, I guess, and he's probably not very popular in Britain right now, but Prince Harry. So Prince Harry is famous for wearing the Pulsar G10. That watch you can buy on eBay anywhere from like 90 quid in rougher condition right through to 150 quid in good condition and, you know, straps and stuff. But I tried to get that issued to me, again, a bit like obviously how you tried to get the Navigator issued for me to yourself. And it did not work. Like, to get hold of one of those issued to you is like, you know, finding an honest man in Parliament. It's not going to happen.
You know, I don't mean to have a little bit of a side, but I'd be interested to hear your perspective on this. I think Andrew and I basically share the same perspective, which is that when people there's this thing that happens online when people talk about military watches, and you know, I've never heard Kaz from Two Broke Watch Snobs talk about this topic specifically, but he refers often to the watch neckbeard. Who's a character that he is sort of famous. Kaz has developed this character. We've tried to get Neckbeard on the show in the past.
He's hard to tie down.
He's hard to book. You know, people neckbeard about military watches, and you know, invariably people get to NSN numbers and what's the British version of the NSN? Is that the G10?
So the NSN or the issued watch. The starting of it is actually W10.
W10, excuse me.
So G10 is the colloquial term. We call them G10s because I don't know what so we call it a flick. So you know the piece of paper or the digital piece of paper that tells the military what pieces of military equipment that you have issued to you that you then have to give back. So we call that a flick. That's what's nicknamed. But the actual piece of paper, the form is called a G1098. So that form. There's a G1098 for Dan Clayton somewhere in the world of the internet or the military internet, and that tells the storeman what I'm entitled to have and what I already have.
And in the U.S. Army, we just call this a flipple. We don't actually.
Not really. That's the.
I wouldn't have known. I'm like, okay. Cool.
A flipple is when you have something you're not supposed to have and they charge you for it,
or you don't have something you're supposed to have.
It's lost. That's the charging document.
So you acquired it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So to get back on track, the idea that you know, when anytime a military thread on WatchUSeek or whatever, you know, people talk about NSN numbers and you know, bottom line, I don't care if it's special forces or it's line infantry units or it's, you know, someone on the FOB. People in a deployed environment are wearing
G-Shocks, Suntos, Garmin,
and Ironman.
Yeah.
You know,
exactly that.
The reality is if you want an authentic, no shit, this is what Joe is wearing or this is what the Navy SEAL is wearing, go get a fucking Sunto because that's what they're wearing.
Don't get a Luminox. They're definitely not wearing those.
Right. Yeah. Well, some wear Luminox, but
maybe.
But on average,
it's because their real lost is watch or real watch is lost.
It's a Sunto. You know, by and large,
it's definitely a Sunto. So the Sunto cores are the one, aren't they?
That's right.
Standard that you see across the military.
And a Sunto core is not a watch that's sort of watch fam friendly. Maybe in certain circles, but that's not a WatchUSeek watch. A Sunto core is not a WatchUSeek watch.
You'll be surprised. There is actually a WatchUSeek forum just for the Sunto core.
And those are the people that know what the fuck they're talking about.
Yeah, of course, of course.
But in any event, we don't care about that. We care about something different, and so it's important for us to say that, right? I think it's important for us to at least acknowledge the idea that there's two things happening here. There's the thing that Joe is wearing on the same wrist that's got an M16 in it, versus the watch the horological neckbeard is wearing.
Yes, definitely.
Because I bet dollars to donuts, you're probably not wearing your Explorer.
No,
when you're working.
I don't wear my Explorer when I go to work. Definitely
not.
Yeah.
So marathon navigation.
Maybe when I'm doing like a normal office day. But if I was out in, on a training exercise, operations or in an austere environment, I definitely would not be wearing that.
Right.
And it's not because it probably wouldn't be able to handle it. It's not that at all. It's just I'd rather not take it with me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, because if you lose it, there's some heartache there.
Yeah, exactly that. I'd definitely rather take something that's cheaper, that's is just as robust, but I'm not going to cry at having to replace it because I've broken it or whatever.
I worked with a guy last year who brought 5 F91Ws to a training exercise.
Baller.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I remember listening to that episode. You said he kept on handing them out to different people.
Yeah, yeah. Just a player right there.
But yeah, no, I mean, if people want to go out and buy an issued watch that is issued into, if I'm going to go off my experience, guys. I'm not going to talk too much about the American military. I've only ever worked with you. in the British Army, if they want the genuine one that has an NSN number that is sat in a store in the UK for general service, you have to go out and buy the Pulsar G10.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that actually is because, funny enough, it's because back in mid 2000s, CWC lost the contract for the G10 watch, and that's what it was. Basically, not because the watches were crap or whatever. It was literally because, again, it came down to budgetary restraints, and Pulsar offered a watch at a cheaper budget. The other side of it is, right up until the early to mid 2000s, you're looking 2006, 2007, really. The G10 watches still had tritium paint on the dial,
which
Pulsar,
is dangerous.
Dangerous, yeah, exactly. It's it's mild. It's obviously a radioactive isotope, and it's not good if you lick it. You will
It'll
be
taste
in
good,
a
though.
world of it. May taste good, but that's definitely a way to get out of work. So it wasn't deemed as safe. And effectively, those watches that weren't issued or had to be backloaded back into stores to be destroyed because tritium was deemed too dangerous.
Sure.
So they not only did they change, obviously, the supply manufacturer from CWC to Pulsar, in my experience, but also it was safer because they don't use tritium paint. They use superluminova to obviously have the low light visibility on those watches.
And in the United States, there's a number of Marathon watches that fit that same role, right? Marathon's sort of the U.S. brand that fits that same role. So, how about for folks that want a military watch that maybe doesn't have NSN bona fides, but has that same, so thinking in the $300 to $1,000 range, the same sort of authenticity without perhaps being per se authentic. Because there's a number of watches. I think Andrew and I have a couple that we really like and have talked about. But what about you?
I've got two watches. That obviously fall under that category. We've obviously touched on them before. You've got the Sangin Instruments, which obviously has been developed by, the military and influenced by the military. But if you want to go, at the moment he's only got one quartz watch, which is the K2. But if you want to go more quartz, straight down the line, and you just, want to grab and go watch that has a connection to the military, I would look at Elliot Brown. So not all of their watches are military grade and have an NSN number, as it were. There is one line that is military issued currently, and it has a searchable NSN number, and that's the Halton Divers watch. So that is on issue. However, their watches are all built to the same standard. So if you look at the Elliot Brown Canford watch, they're about £300 last I checked. 300, 350, dependent on obviously, if you get bracelet or if you get rubber or whatever, that kind of stuff, but those are, really good, robust watches. They've got 200 meters, water resistance. They're shock proof. They've got like internal shock mountings on the movement as well. And then you add in the fact that it's a quartz movement, which is obviously robust to shock as well anyway, by default of being quartz. And also the other side of it is it looks good. You know what I mean? Like it looks like a good watch.
Right.
But also, like, right down to their case design, which is really clever. They've got hex bolts for their instead of spring bars. They got screw-in bars.
Oh, really?
So you're never going to lose it. You know what I mean? So there's that robustness there. And obviously, because the Canford range isn't issued, as it were, you get loads of different colorways. So you can buy a cream dial, you can buy a blue dial, you can buy a black dial with cream hands, or black dial with white hands, or whatever. If you want to have different accent colors, then you can. So I would look at them for military grade, not necessarily the military issued version, because like I said, they have one watch which is issued, and then they have a whole complete other range that isn't issued. And also, guys, for the ladies listening out there, they also have a ladies range. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's all accessible. you're looking about £350.
Well, let's run through some watches. Maybe you can give us a simple thumbs up and thumbs down, and 15, 20 seconds of analysis. Well, I've got a couple watches here, but we've got a couple of other watches too that sort of meet that same standard. So, Hamilton Khaki Mechanical.
Personally, I don't like them because they, especially that Pioneer one, that reissue.
Yeah.
It's a nice watch, obviously. It's a good watch for the money. I personally don't like the stippled dial because it's not in keeping to the originals. Also, you can buy an original Hamilton car key, the W10s, which obviously the Pioneer mechanicals were based on, for less than retail of the new one.
That's fair. Fair enough.
That's just personally. However, Hamilton as a whole, if you want a mechanical watch which has military provenance, loosely, because they were issued. They were issued, to the American forces. They were issued to the British forces, all different guises, and they're solid watches. You know what I mean? Like you buy a Hamilton for $350, a mechanical one, or the price range, it'll last you your lifetime.
Okay. Next,
How about the HK-Ed 1963?
or perhaps the Seagull 1963.
The Seagull 63.
That's a chronograph.
The
Chinese
Air Force.
I've not had any experience with them, so I'm not going to pass judgment. I've heard that the Seagull movement, dependent on grade, can be a little bit difficult, if that's correct to say.
Finicky.
But finicky, yeah. I've heard some of their earlier models had quality control issues, but I can't comment really because I've never experienced it.
Okay. Seiko SNK 809.
So the Seiko 5s, yeah?
Yes.
I think they're brilliant. You know what I mean? We talk about the Mac v SOG watches earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Those Seiko SNKs and that line of Seiko 5s are pretty much directly developed from the early Sportsmatic and Seiko 5 line from the 60s. Absolutely fantastic watch. And you know what? It's 80 quid last I checked on eBay. Get a couple of straps in there on top, spend 150 quid on a watch and some nicer straps to change it up. Fantastic.
What's the difference between a quid and a pound? You said you
Same.
use them.
It's like bucks. Quid is like bucks.
Okay.
It's the same thing.
All right. So, how about the Bulova Hack Automatic?
Is that the reissues of like the
Yes.
Yeah.
A11?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I've never seen any of the reissues other than the Moon Watch reissue.
Sure.
So I'm not going to comment on the exact model, but I think for the heritage, in terms of obviously the fact they did issue them, and obviously they are clearly decent watches for the money now, I don't think you could go wrong. But in terms of the exact model, I've not had experience of it.
Okay, one more, and this is one we've talked about a couple times recently, and in fact, you and I have talked about this recently, so I kind of know your answer. But the Serica, this is the Matt Haranek Serica WM Brown watch.
Yeah, no, I think they're really cool. What I like about them is that they haven't got their name on the dial.
Right, no branding on that dial.
No branding. I think that's really nice, and the fact that it makes the owner impart their own story onto it, and it's just a nice watch. It proves that you don't always have to have a brand to have a nice watch, right?
Mm-hmm.
I like that there's different colorways, and I like that you can pick your handset. And also, if Matt Haranek is involved with it, we know that he wrote A Man in His Watch. We know he's big into the whole Hodinkee watch thing.
Right.
I don't think he's going to put his name to something that would be considered crap.
Mm-hmm.
But, from my opinion anyway.
And you know what? Those watches are beautiful. I think that's still my favorite watch of 2019. Maybe not my favorite, but it's up there in a small list. So
I also like the fact that you can engage with Serica watches and they'll get back to you.
Totally.
You know what I mean? And I
last
think
question,
that's an
if you
important
don't.
thing.
Okay, so one more question, and then we're going to transition. Andrew, go.
What watch has eluded you thus far that you've been on the hunt for, that you haven't been able to get? Maybe it's a grail watch. Maybe it's a new pursuit. What is still out there that you are on the hunt for?
Okay. So there's a watch that I'm still yet to get that I'd love to have. And it's eluded me despite the fact that they are everywhere.
Uh-oh.
And Amiga Speedmaster.
Okay.
It's really weird, isn't it? They're everywhere. But
Everywhere.
You know what?
There's one
I
in
have
this
one,
building.
Dan.
Yeah. So, you know what I mean? Like, just everywhere, and I still haven't had the opportunity, as it were, to pull the trigger on.
Huh.
Well, this is the sad time where we have to stop talking about watches, and for the sake of our wives, talk about other things we like. Andrew, I know you have some stuff because I have had the pleasure of tasting your stuff.
Yeah.
Go.
So in the last couple weeks, I purchased a sausage stuffer, and I've had a grinder for a very long time, and I grind meat with great regularity, but I finally went ahead and decided to try making sausages, which turned out to be a little bit harder than just making ground meat. And I mean, I don't know.
There's the whole making the sausage thing.
Yeah, no, not only have I seen how sausage is made, but I have a peanut butter jar of salt water in the back of my fridge filled with sausage casings that every time my wife opens the fridge, she hates. I can hear like a little dry heavy retch every time she looks into the back of the fridge. Just Google what an MP sausage casing looks like, and you'll understand. I have one of those.
It looks like a condom.
No, it doesn't. It looks like it looks like it looks like intestines in a jar.
Gross.
So that's what's in the back of my fridge now. So anyway, I made 2 varieties of sausage. I made an andouille, which I spell Andooie.
Yes,
because that's how it sounds like it ought to be spelled.
Andouille.
And then I made just a traditional pork andouille. And
you write that on the package, andouille.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No, I mean I know because I have.
How else am I supposed to pick it out of my freezer? And then I also made a jalapeno and pepper jack beef sausage.
Yeah, that's
I
delicious.
smoked. And so I learned a couple things. Number one, first and foremost, is stuff the sausage casing way more than you think you need to.
Get it in there.
And when people say make sure the meat is like almost frozen before you start stuffing it, they're not kidding. It got so hard once it reached like gelatinous.
There's some critical mass that you need to reach.
It's got to stay nice and cold the whole time. But so make sure it's nice and cold. Stuff it tighter than you think. But we talked a little bit about this earlier. The flavors were pretty close for the first time making sausage.
Yeah, totally.
The andouille, I want spicier. You said you wanted more fat content.
I want more fat. Give me that fat.
Which I gotta have some more of it to see, because all I did was pull off a little patty and cook the patty, and I dug it. Though I do see, thinking back on it, I see the little bit more fat content. But with the beef, I overdid the fat. I feel like I think I got a little bit too fatty, and it's got just like a touch, like a millety consistency.
And I don't mind that. With regards to your andouille, I cooked them in sausages, right? So the jalapeno jack, the sausage came cooked. Mm-hmm. The andouille was not cooked, and so
I'm glad you didn't get that the other way around. Otherwise, I would have given your whole family salmonella.
I know we've all died of botulism.
Yeah, no, not botulism, just salmonella.
Oregon Trail. My experience was that I cooked it. I sort of steamed it.
Okay.
And then ate them from the sausage link. I think if I had sliced and fried it, I think that might have been a more smooth transition. But the way I cooked it, it wound up being I wanted just a touch more fat.
Okay, good to know. For the next round, next weekend I'll be making some more sausages.
So if you have sausage making tips, if you're into the sausage
or recipes, because I'm looking for some good recipes, because we're also going to make pepperoni sticks here.
Pepperoni sticks, yeah, that's right. Yeah. So hit Andrew up, because he's the man with the meat. Mm-hmm. Hit him up, and we'll give those a try, and perhaps we'll do like a tasting on the air.
Ooh, we could do that. That would be delightful.
Awesome. Yeah. Dan, I understand you came with another thing today, at least another thing.
Yeah, I did. I'm actually going to mix up very quickly, but it's still only going to be 2. Okay, so I'm going to keep one of the originals, and then I'm going to change one for a different submission. So
we call this an audible. Mm-hmm. In the States, this is an audible.
Cool. So the first one then is the Fighter Pilot podcast.
Oh,
so that's something that I was going to bring into raise awareness of. So obviously your audience listen to podcasts, because otherwise we wouldn't be having a conversation like we are now.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But if you're into loosely some of the stuff that we've touched on in today's episode, we talk about the military and all that kind of stuff, give the Fighter Pilot podcast a listen to, because what it is it's interviews with guys across various different militaries, predominantly militaries, but all have different insights into various aircraft. So they either operate the aircraft and their pilots, their aircrew, or they design them and all that kind of stuff. And that's just a really interesting, again, conversational podcast, but it's about a really cool topic. So they, for example, they do episodes where they look at a particular kind of aircraft, and they take it from its inception right through to what it's doing now, all through guys who work, live and breathe it. And I just think it's a fantastic podcast, and especially if you're into aviation or you're into the military, or you just want to learn something new, it's just a really good podcast to get involved in. Number 2, slightly watch related. Can we go watch related?
We can.
Of course,
it's
man.
allowed here.
Of course.
Yeah. So we touched on, obviously, the whole development piece, obviously, earlier in the conversation. It's all very well me suggesting watches in the military, but if you buy a decent military watch, you also have to have a decent military strap, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, I would say go hit up Zulu Alpha straps for your military watch straps.
And tell us why.
Okay, so it's a unique design, the way that the strap fastens, which means that you will always get the perfect fit to your own wrist. So there's none of this whole messing around with pin holes and pin and buckles and all that kind of stuff. It's almost like on a roller pin kind of friction-based thing. So you will always get the ideal fit for what you need. Also, the straps have been developed by guys who have the whole outdoors / active kind of lifestyle, and they've been tested properly for that kind of stuff. And also they come in set sizes. You've got 20 mil, you've got 22, different colorways. And they're, Darren, who runs it, is very approachable. He's also a watch guy, and he's happy to obviously help out where he can with guys if they've got, for example, a requirement to have a certain length of a strap, as an example. So say, I don't know, you want to wear it over a dive suit, which is actually, pretty common apparently. He can make you an extra long one. You know what I mean? So stuff like that. So
fantastic. I've got another thing today, but like Dan, I'm going to have to do a little caveat because this is ancillary to watches. I actually, let me start by saying I feel a little underqualified to talk about this, but it's a thing I wanted to talk about anyway. And so this is the end of the episode. And if you're at all reticent to hear talk about women collecting watches or even perhaps some slightly progressive leanings, feel free to turn the episode off now, and we'll see you next week. With that said, yeah, good. With that said, Hodinkee is obviously a famous website. Hodinkee does a series called Talking Watches, in which they interview celebrities about their watch collections. David Robinson, Jack Nicholas, as opposed to Nicholson, and a number of other celebrities. John Mayer is, I think, probably my favorite. He's been on Talking Watches 2 times.
I want Ellen on there.
I do want Ellen on there too. So Talking Watches had their first ever woman-focused episode this last week. And they interviewed Bethany Frankel. Bethany Frankel is a entrepreneur, as well as one of the regulars on one of the one of the Real Housewives series, something I don't have any familiarity with. And so Hodinkee had their first woman. It was Bethany Frankel, and there's been some hubbub.
I believe it.
There's been some hubbub, and I think that we all need to sort of, as we think about the collection that we have, and as we think about the collection that other people have, and as we think about what we're doing here, what are we doing here? I think we all need to be sort of thoughtful, and we need to sort of sit back and look at this thing. The reason this came up is because when I watched this thing, I had some feelings, and they're feelings I'm not super proud of, because I listened to 10 and 2's latest podcast in which they talked about this thing, and 10 and 2, Kat and Catlin, a couple of watch people that we are very fond of, people we have a relationship with, who run, as I've said before, I think maybe one of the best, my favorite watch podcast right now is 10 and 2. and they had some perspective on this, as you imagine they may, being women.
Shocker.
I suspect they're both women, and it sort of took me down a peg. And I don't mean to say that I didn't like Bethany Frankel's interview or I didn't like the episode, but I had some gut reactions, and I want to check myself, and I want to take an opportunity to tell you to check yourself too. The comments on the Hodinkee video on YouTube are pretty toxic. I feel fair saying that. I think that there's a lot of things, and we don't need to label it sexism, because it probably is some of that, but it doesn't need a label. I think that we all need to take a step back and think about what's happening here. David Robinson is a rich person who has rich person watches, and I'm interested to hear about what he says. Bethany Frankel, like her or dislike her, a watch person who has watches and tastes, and that is interesting. And to the extent that you're going to have criticisms of any person, I want to, for myself, be more mindful, not just in this realm, but just in life, because it occurred to me that something was happening to me as I watched that video that I need to fix. Maybe not fix, but I need to be aware of, right? The comments about the way she got some of her watches. Oh, she got that from a dude. Or the way she enjoyed some of her watches. Oh, this is just jewelry to her. Or the way she chose which watch she might wear for the day. Oh, she picks a quartz watch because it's easy.
I do that shit all the time.
All of those things are true for me, except for having gotten watches from ex-boyfriends. None of my ex-boyfriends gave me any watches.
No, not yet. There's still time.
So, I don't want to, I'm soapboxing a little bit. I don't want to go over the top with the soapboxing. With that said, I want us to all sort of step back on this thing. If you've had opinions, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, right? We all have feelings. We all have opinions. I want you to think about it. For me, I can relate to these things, and I want to be open and honest about that. Most of my watches are jewelry.
They all are.
They're jewelry, right? There's a couple watches I have that are not, and that I don't wear like jewelry. But by and large, most of my watches are jewelry. Most of the time, when I put a watch on the morning, I don't set that watch until about 9:30, 10, when I realize I haven't set it.
Or you've missed your first meeting.
Yeah, that's right. So let's be fair. Let's be equitable, and also let's do a good job in being better than we are. Let's all work to be better than we are, because I hope that Talking Watches finds another. I don't know how many of these they do a year, maybe 10 or 12. I hope that 4 or 5 or 6 of those this next year are women, and I think that probably there's not quite the same pool of material there, but. I would love to get more and more and more and more of that perspective. And I want us to all do a better job about not having these yucky gut reactions to that kind of thing.
Ditto.
Boom. Dan, thank you so much for joining us. This has been awesome. I really, really, really enjoy having you. The breadth of your knowledge, we cannot even get close to covering in an hour and 18 minutes as we sit right now. I think that you're just a really enjoyable guest, and I'm really appreciative you're here. Can you do me a favor and just tell people how to find you and how to find some of your knowledge? Take 20 seconds.
Okay. Well, firstly, thank you for letting me come on and chatting with you guys today as well. I've really enjoyed it, and I hopefully you can come on again or chat again in the future as we have done today.
Yeah, we'll see.
But if if anyone wants to obviously follow me on Instagram, it's obviously timely_moments. Give me a follow. Hit me up on there. Any questions that you want to talk about about what we've spoken today, or if there's any further fallout on my collection or hints and tips, just drop me a message, and I'll do my best to get back to you. I will caveat it, even though you guys class me and say that I'm an expert in military stuff, it's only my opinion. It's only from my own research. So I'm also fallible, and also if I've got something wrong today, or want to give me some advice, guys, just send it through, because at the end of the day, we're all learning, aren't we? You know what I mean?
We're on 40 and 20 where mistakes are free, so
cool.
They'll just send it right to us.
All right. Well, Andrew, you got anything else before we wrap up today?
I don't.
All right. Well, thank you, Dan, for joining us. And thank you at home for joining us today for this episode of 40 and 20. Check us out on Instagram at 40 and 20. Also, check out Dan at timely_moments. Check us out on patreon.com/40 and 20. If you have any inclination to support the show, it's free to go to that link and less free to support our show. But that is how we get all the support for our hosting and the various things that we need to pay for to produce this free podcast. Don't forget to tune back in next Thursday for another hour of watches, food, drinks, life, and other things we like.
Bye-bye.